Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 100. It's our 100th meeting, so it's a special occasion here. And thank you, Mr. Lemire, for your enthusiasm. And I also like to point out that it's Alex's birthday today, so happy birthday. Thank you for all the assistance you provide for this important study. So pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, April 24, 2023, the committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-27, an act to enact the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, and the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. I'd like to welcome our witnesses today and also apologize for our late start. We have Sébastien Gams.
Privacy Preserving and Ethical Analysis of Big Data at the l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Nous avons de Flinks.
We have from Flinks, Philippe Letarte, who is responsible for policy and public affairs. Welcome. And from Option Consommateur, we have here with us in Ottawa, Sarah-Ève Lévesque, lawyer, and Alexandre Plourde, who is also a lawyer. And finally, we have online Sel Melouli, Deputy Vice Rector, Education and Lifelong Learning. He is joining us by video conference. And without further ado, I'd like to begin with presentations. I'll give the floor to Mr. Gams for 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I will be speaking in French, but I'm comfortable handling questions in both languages, so I'd like to use this 5 minutes to talk to you about the new issues with respect to artificial intelligence. One thing that I feel is important and which is not really discussed to great length in the bill is machine learning. This resumes data, summarizes data. I think that we need to really look at an impact analysis of the factors used with respect to that. How we could use, they can use black boxes in order to do this. Another issue that we need to deal with in the future is that most of the machine learning models being developed are improved by pre-training, and we don't always know what the origin of the data is. So these are important issues with respect to this sector. We have to look at the high impact of using this AI. We also, I think, there's a problem between creators and the models under Section 39, we talk about the fact that we're responsible for the use of learning models, but what about the foundational models that are being used? These are models that can be used for many different reasons, and I think we have to decide. It's difficult to predict whether all of these models will be used for proper uses. Perhaps the creators are going to and the deployment of the model is something that needs to be looked at. As far as the second issue, the second issue that we have to look at is providing someone with an explanation as to how information was used to make predictions. What's the use going to be made of the data, and what is the impact of this decision on an individual? It's really necessary that we be transparent about this, and we have to be able to provide an understandable explanation, especially when in cases of significant impact. And does the person have any recourse? Are they going to be able to challenge the machine-made decision? Also, we know that there'll be impacts on individuals. There's a whole issue of recourse and the ability to have a decision reviewed. And impact analyses. This is another issue that's extremely important. I didn't talk about fairness beforehand, but that's something that also has to be considered. And I think that setting aside the Act and all the difficulties that it may raise, I think we have to look at application. What type of equity can be used in AI, and how are we going to provide this explanation? If we're talking about a medical situation, it's different from, let's say, a financial or banking explanation. And to conclude, if there are no concrete standards that explain these equity measures, I think that there are a lot of definitions of what is fair out there. There's already a debate going on between various companies right now and between researchers about whether or not a system is discriminatory or not, whether the right matrices have been used. And it's possible to cheat. And so this is all this is an element that has to be investigated further. And perhaps an explanation may be realistic, but maybe it doesn't really reflect what the reality is. This is so we have to think about this and come up with some concrete standards to avoid the situation where there's this jurisdictional or legal void. And finally, one last thing that I'd like to raise, and this deals with privacy, the difference in definitions that we give with respect to de-identification and anonymization. There's no real understanding of what that means, about what this means. There's no real perfect method for determining what we mean by these terms. When you talk about anonymizing data, this can include other risks. So these terms have to be clarified, and we need a good explanation as to what's meant by these terms. I hope I didn't go over my time too much. Thank you very much. I'm a little bit flexible with the time. I now turn the floor over to Mr. Letarte from Finks for 5 minutes. Mr. Lightbound, committee members, thank you for welcoming me here today. My name is Philippe Letarte, and I'm responsible for government relations and public affairs for Flinks. Flinks is a Canadian technological business founded in Montreal, and the mission is to allow consumers to control their finances and create a banking environment based on the needs of the client. Open banking based on the individual's capacity to control and direct the way that their financial data will be used in order to receive better financial discussions. In order to avoid any confusion about technical terms, I will continue the rest of my statement in English.
Is apparent throughout the CPPA, and once enacted, will clearly constitute a cornerstone for all activities organizations are engaged in involving the processing of personal information. This is a much-needed overhaul from the CPPA's predecessor, which will introduce a more consumer protectionist approach to processing activities, while also moving Canada's privacy regime closer to that which has been established across other OECD countries. Flinks is pleased to see that consent will now form the basis for all personal information processing activities. As previously mentioned, one of Flinks' raison d'être is to give consumer control over their personal and financial information, and more specifically, to direct how such information is used and by whom. Inherently, this involves many participants in the ecosystem Flinks currently operates in. We do, however, remain concerned by the following wording set forth in Section 72 of the CPPA, if both organizations are subject to the data portability framework. This proposed language raises questions related to how an organization takes part in this framework, whether there will be multiple frameworks for different types of organization, what limits are in place if a given organization is not part of the said framework, and what the requirements will be to remain compliant with such framework. This language is also incompatible with the proposed language in last week's Fall Economic Statement and the Policy Statement on Consumer-Driven Banking, which states that the federal government will mandate participation for federally regulated entities. It is now an indisputable fact that jurisdictions with successful open banking regime have not only forced participation of an overwhelming majority of their financial institutions and third parties in the framework, but also because strong and clear regulations have given confidence to consumers that adequate protections were put in place. With the current wording, there's a risk of inadequacy between CPPA and upcoming future consumer-driven banking regulation about which entities and datasets are covered by which framework, therefore leaving Canadian consumers confused and depriving them of the benefits of consumer-driven finance. We therefore recommend a change to wording of Section 72 to make the participation in the data portability framework mandatory to organizations in the financial sector, not if, but when, and to avoid any potential loopholes and/or flaws between different regulations dealing with data portability rights. We also have concerns about the concept of legitimate interest, exception to consent of Section 18, paragraph 3 and 18, paragraph 4 of the CPPA. The inclusion of this exception appears to lend itself to abuse in absence of any further guidance or clarification, as no definitions are provided for what legitimate interests or adverse effects are. This creates the possibility for a scenario where organizations are left to conduct their own assessment as to what the weight of a legitimate interest and adverse effects are, without any further information to rely upon in doing so. This is problematic, as an organization may, for example, seek to use the legitimate interest exception as a way of curtailing any limits the CPPA places on consent or secondary uses of personal information. This type of interpretation or application of a legitimate interest by a participant in an open banking environment will completely erode any trust in open banking in Canada. In light of this, please allow us to respectfully recommend clarifying this provision by establishing clearer definition or providing assessment criteria for what a legitimate interest and an adverse effect are. In the same vein, we respectfully ask the committee to also clarify the type of scenario or criteria for determining what will be in the clear interest of an individual, as mentioned in Section 29, paragraph 1 of the CPPA. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate the urgent need for Canadians to be able to benefit from a true consumer-driven banking system. Not a great number of public policies have proven as beneficial as open banking since the advent of a digital economy. It helps drive competition and innovation in a really concentrated and archaic sector. It empowers consumers to make better informed financial decisions while giving them control over their own data. It enhances financial inclusion of the most vulnerable. It reduces drastically the cost of operation for small business owners. It stimulates entrepreneurship and foreign investment, and so on. The measure proposed in the Fall Economic Statement, coupled with the provision and protection established by the CPPA, represent a unique opportunity to provide Canadians with financial freedom and adequate privacy protection while bridging the competition gap with trading partners and other modern economies. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have, as the best of my capabilities, aussi bien en français qu'en anglais. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Letarte.
Thank you, Mr. Letarte. Mr. Vice has a little question with respect to a specific section that you referred to. If
specify paragraph 21 or 29 near the end of your remarks.
Sorry. That will be Section 29, paragraph 1. Sorry.
29, thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je céderai la parole maintenant à...
Thank you. I'll now turn the floor over to Option Consommateur, to Ms. Levac and Mr. Plourde. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present our observations today. My name is Alexandre Plourde. I'm a lawyer with Option Consommateur, and I'm accompanied by my colleague, Sarah Levac, who is also a lawyer with us. Option Consommateur is a not-for-profit association whose mission is to help consumers and we advocate for their rights. As a consumer association, we are regularly in contact with citizens who have difficulty when it comes to the protection of privacy. Over the past few years, we've often intervened on privacy issues, particularly by publishing research reports and participating in consultation on legislation. We've also initiated some class actions founded on the federal law for PIPEDA. As you can read from our brief submitted to the committee, the new CPPA has some shortcomings, particularly with respect to exceptions on consent, the right to forget, limitations on portability, and even digital death. Since we have limited time, we'd like to focus on two aspects of this new bill of concern to us. First of all, the lack of deterrence in the bill and the obstacles that it can pose for consumer civil recourse, and secondly, shortcomings for the protection of children's privacy. With respect to the lack of deterrence, we feel that there are shortcomings that could have an impact on its implementation. First of all, though the bill does include monetary sanctions for some violations of the law can lead to the imposition of some sanctions. However, the CPPA does not have the authority to impose sanctions, and it has to just recommend that this be done to the new tribunal. This additional step means that there will be a delay in the administration of sanctions. Moreover, the deterrence of law is based on the citizen's capacity to avail itself of the legislation before the civil tribunals. However, we feel that the new law with respect to Section 107 does seriously threaten a consumer's capacity to turn to the courts. The problem comes from the fact that the new action does not allow a citizen to pursue business if the conditions are certain conditions aren't fulfilled. In our opinion, we feel that it follows that there will be a lot of debates amongst the tribunals in order to determine the scope of private law and constitutional jurisdiction of provinces in civil law. We're inviting the government to clarify Section 107, which is concurrent with other provincial laws, to ensure that there is no obstruction or obstacles to civil suits in Quebec. I'll now turn the floor to my colleague, Ms. Levesque. Our second point concerns shortcomings in the privacy of children, which, despite the amendments that were announced, although Bill C-27 does acknowledge the sensitive character of personal information of minors, we feel that it doesn't go far enough to really protect the privacy of children. We need to strengthen this protection by integrating better practices recognized in international law. First of all, providing more solid protection to children in the digital world by protecting the commercial exploitation of their information. The web applications that children use allow the companies to collect all kinds of information, and this can in turn be used to do profiling or target them for commercial reasons. The law must provide that decisions concerning the personal information of children should be always bearing in mind their interests. The notion of the interests of the child makes us have a more comprehensive vision of privacy protection. It enables us to assess whether the use of this information by a company is good for this child's overall development and ensure that the rights are respected. As an illustration, it may not be in the interest of a child to provide access to this personal information to parents or guardians when the child is being mistreated, for example. Thank you, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. Now, finally, we will turn the floor over to Mr. Meloui, who is joining us through video conference. Thank you very much for your invitation and for this opportunity to give my opinion on this bill pertaining to artificial intelligence and its use and the use of data. I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Gams said earlier, but I would like to focus on certain aspects of the bill which I feel are not clear or need to be clarified, particularly where we're talking about biased results. That's the elements that is of interest to me. How are we going to... Our AI will never give us the results, 100% of all the results. It's based on machine learning. And we have to understand how the decisions are made to get certain data. So is it one person who feels that they have been hurt? Or is it the responsibility of the corporation that's created the harm? Or if with a machine learning system, it might be 90% correct, but there's always that element that is not correct. So what really concerns me is the definition is in the bill. The second aspect I'd like to focus on is we do machine learning using data, but this data, the company can fragment this data so into various organizational structures. And you can even transform a data. And we're looking at the bill. We have to look at the way companies do their record keeping and anonymous data, as was referred to earlier. How can we be assured that the company has not fragmented this data in a way so that it can be retraced, but there's no way to verify it? That is a very important element that has to be considered. I can show you manuals that show how to manage and anonymize data, but we don't have any certainty when it comes to machine learning. We don't know that the company has used anonymous data. And even if you can, as Mr. Gam said, it's always difficult to do a proper verification, and it's complex. It's a difficult task to do. And the last point I'd like to make is high-impact systems, as this is a loss of confidentiality and integrity, and that may have a catastrophic impact on certain individuals or certain entities. As I said, we have to strike a balance, because if the company has defined its system with an 80% success rate, well, the system, to 97%, well, there's always this 3% we have to worry about. So we're looking at this 3% situation. How are we going to deal with it? We might create harm or prejudice for an individual, despite the fact that the machine learning was done correctly, so that there are several issues involved. There's the data that's used at the beginning, whether or not they're fragmented, and retraceability. That's a very complicated process. And the second element is, even if things have been done properly, are the results biased? And thirdly, how do we ensure that the biased results, or results that don't work, that they've caused harm to an individual, how do we ensure that these results don't enter into this 3% I was referring to earlier? Thank you very much, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have in either French or English. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Louis. I'll now begin the discussion with Mr. Jenner for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for coming here today. Mr. Louis, I would like to begin with you. You come from Laval University, if I understand correctly. I think I'm the one who invited you. Montreal or Laval? Laval. I visited you in September, and I saw that Laval was in a good position to do research on AI. You're a researcher yourself, I would imagine. You seem to have a good handle on this issue. You talked about biased results and the fragmentation of data. When you talk about learning in AI, well, this learning and this anonymization. What's the difference between these two things so that I can understand correctly? I'll answer very happily. When you talk about anonymous data, let's say that I don't use the name of the person with the machine learning, or I don't use country of origin or SIN number. But what do you mean by learning? Yes. Well, when I talk about learning, it's the machine learning. The machine is given a certain number of data. It could be supervised or unsupervised learning. And I'm going to refer to these two types of learning. With supervised machine learning, we give a range of material to a machine that I'm going to label. I'll give you an example. I might say, Sel Melouli, he's a professor, and I'm going to tag, he's from an ethnic minority, and do the same thing for excellent behavior or bad behavior. And I'm going to, the machine will use this data so I can use my personal data in order to learn by tagging who I am as a person without anonymizing the data. So this data, which is personal to me, well, the system learns on the basis of this personal data. And when I say that if we're talking about anonymous data, if the data is anonymous, well, I can be profiled on any context that the machine may decide. It can use my accent, my country. So you talked about this 3% error rate. You talked about biased results. Yes, because this is the machine learning system. I always say this to my systems. If your system doesn't provide you with data that's 100% correct, there's a problem. And with machine learning, you're using hundreds of thousands of data, so we can't be sure that all of this data is correct. So we have to factor in the performance, and that's how we can assess the capacity of the system. You might get a good answer, but you could also get the incorrect answer. So it's a machine that's going to decide. We've seen this on several instances. Well, then, is this an industry standard, this 97.3, or is this something that you've come up with? Or no, it's not an industry standard. I'm talking about performance criteria and how we assess systems. And if I'm building a new system, I have to use algorithms in order to come up with the best machine learning system possible. And if it performs in 97% of the case and 3%, but not in 3% of the cases, well, other researchers are going to work in order on the system to improve it, in order to increase its capacity or its performance. So you also talked about the AI impact and the success rate. I would imagine there's a risk there with respect to the description in the current act. What are you suggesting that we must change? I can't tell you exactly what I would recommend or change, but I think you really have to look at the capacity of a system to conduct itself properly and the capacity of the machine to make mistakes. With AI today, with our systems, I think that this factor has to be considered because the systems are not 100% reliable. These are systems with a high degree of reliability, but they are not 100% reliable. For these reasons, I talked about the loss of confidentiality or integrity that could have a significant impact on some individuals. If 97% don't have an impact, well, then we have a high impact system. But if we're talking about 1% out of 100 million people or 100,000 people, well, perhaps maybe we be content with a 1% error rate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ms. Lapointe. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Mr. Letarte. In your opinion, do you think that the legislation provides for appropriate measures to enable companies to comply? I think it's a good start. I know I feel that C27 sets a good groundwork for a legal framework, and it would enable us to share information. So I think it's off to a good start. I also think that we need to have a section, maybe through the regs or in the back, that talks about conditions that accompany C27. But I would say that this is a good start for companies. Thank you. We do understand that if the legislation on privacy and artificial intelligence act is not harmonized with other countries, the efficiency of the rules and the legislation will be compromised. What do you think about the way that the various jurisdictions can work together in implementing standards? For artificial intelligence, protection of privacy, and AI. What we need to understand is that a banking system is based on the client's needs. So this is already present worldwide. Canada is just about the only developed country that does not have data mobility. The whole of Europe has data mobility. Australia does too. So the interoperability function is very important. I think it's time for Canada to join to step up to the plate and be modern when it comes to portability. As for interoperability, I would say that the rules are not too complicated, but I'm no expert in AI. It's a very complex sector. I believe that the president of AI actually had to resign at one point. Some witnesses have said that the pop-up windows that show up on various websites are not good because people don't really read them and just click yes. I've done that myself often. What do you think about the consent of organization and consumers? Should it be tied into the organization as well? Absolutely. That's why we're very happy to see C27 in a system that is in a gray zone. Well, we've been asking the federal government to intervene on behalf of the consumer. You're talking about pop-ups. Our sector is much more regulated. So if you have an application online for accounting or managing your retirement or investments, you're asked for consent, and we want this consent to be protected. So we want adequate protection. It's a little bit different from the pop-ups, but what we're asking for regulations that enables the consumer to consent to giving their data out, And we want to ensure we have adequate protection, because talking about our personal data and finance is a bit of a taboo in our society. So it's important to have adequate protections. Religion is also a taboo, yes. So yes, in all of the jurisdictions I mentioned earlier, the responsibility for consent is up to companies. We're happy with that, because that will create a legal framework that is going to better meet the needs of the client or customer. I'd like to put the next question to Ms. Levac or Mr. Plourde. Consent is one way of protecting the consumers, and that's the objective of this bill. We could have chosen something else. We could have included other standards of protection, but it could be a method that works to protect consumers in the digital sector, so that consumer has control over their data, providing that the consent is effective and can be used really by the consumers. One problem that we have with C27 when it comes to consent is that there are exceptions, and I think that the exceptions are too broad. The exceptions that concern us the most is Section 18, where the use of data for business activities, an exception which we feel is too broad. And what about explicit consent? I think that we don't want to give too much flexibility to corporations. At the start of your question, you talked about the pop-up windows. I think you're referring to people are always asked for consent when it comes to pop-up windows. We know that people are bombarded. They're always being asked to give their consent. But we think that businesses should be creative and come up with some effective solutions, meaning that they need to offer solutions that enable consumers to give a block refusal. So when you're going on the internet or when you're looking at technological platforms, when it comes to our privacy, it's important that the data be protected. We don't know how these corporations are going to necessarily use the data, but when you're constantly asked each and every time to give your consent, what we're suggesting, and we've talked about this in our brief, give some type of provide some kind of format so a client can refuse to share their data with anybody. It's what we call a do not track mechanism, which is already on the web, but we're suggesting that there should be an obligation to recognize this do not track, and in one fell swoop, you can refuse to ensure that you can refuse to have your data shared. Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. If I may, it's rare that I do this, but Mr. Plourde, what you said is very interesting. You talked about the browsers have a block refusal. I feel that's very interesting. But do you have a legislative proposal, any article or section that could include what you're suggesting? That's a very good question. It can go into the section on consent. I don't have the number in my head. We could perhaps give the consumer some way to give a block refusal for data sharing. We can perhaps provide for the consumer to give a refusal, and then it'll have to be respected by the businesses. It's not very technical technically difficult to do that. I think we just have to make sure that the companies do, in fact, respect it. If you have a specific proposal, please don't hesitate to do so. I'm sensitive to the consent fatigue. I know that when we see that it has a limited value, as MP Lapointe pointed out, so often we just hit yes in order to accelerate the process. So one final question for Mr. Letarte, so that it's clear in everyone's mind. What do you mean when you talk about data portability? In concrete terms, what do you mean by that? Very quickly now. The right to data portability. Here in Canada, you're not the owner of your financial data. You create an account. You have banking accounts. You have your address in this. Right now, if you want to use another financial institution, the bank can say no because you don't own your data, your financial data. So portability rights means that it's not an invention of the private sector or tech companies. It's a legislative proposal that was made by the UK, by the Competition and Market Authority, further to the 2008 crisis, because it was felt that the banks didn't put the consumers first. So in a report that was called Make Your Bank Work Harder for You, the solution was to provide portability rights. So you're giving back the right to consumers to have ownership of their financial data, and so that they can go from one bank to the other to compare mortgage rates, etc. Most countries in the OECD and even 70 big economy systems do have a data portability system. Australia is ahead of the game. It has done this also for communications energy. I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you. You're very generous, Mr. Lemire. We'll go back to the regular program. Mr. Lemire, the floor is yours. 5 minutes and then I need a break. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll begin with Mr. Gams, if I may. I'd like to take advantage of your expertise. Radio-Canada said that the departments of the government are getting data using espionage. These surveillance tools have not been looked at in terms of risk factors. So, given this context, would you include the public sector in C27, and what are your main sources of concern with respect to the fact that the government entities are using these surveillance techniques? That's a huge question. And the finality of using these tools is questionable. I didn't think that, according to the information that came out, that it was kind of muddy. I think that a government must be irreproachable when it comes to using data, and we have to consider the high impact or significant impact on individuals. I can't go into all the details of this, but there are people who have gone to prison or who have died because of this tool. And in some countries, in totalitarian countries, this can be misused. So clearly, there has to be an in-depth investigation done on the use of these tools by the government. It's necessary to ensure that these C27 tools be extended to the public sector. How can it be adapted to regulate the use of such tools in the public sector? I think you need to add a section stating that surveillance tools for data collection cannot be done without the consent of individuals. I think you have to be more specific in the Act to ensure that if ever these tools were used, that there's some type of guardrail put in terms of national security. There may be some exceptions, but the example that was given had nothing to do with national security. I think that we have to ensure that there are guardrails and we have to allow for judicial reviews there as well. Thank you.
With the emergence of quantum energy, a surveillance mechanism might be necessary. This bill needs to be valid for a number of years, so we have to look at quantum that's coming up. What kind of surveillance mechanism can be necessary in order to protect information of Quebecers and Canadians? So Quantic will have an impact on the security of communications, not only on surveillance tool, but generally speaking. So in security standards developed in the U.S. that will become standards on the Internet, there's a need for security standards that resist quantic attacks. I'm not sure whether it needs to be specified in this bill. People are talking about the post-quantic resistance now, so that's why it can touch on personal data in general. Option consommateur, Madame Levesque or Mr. Plourde. C-27 will replace PIPEDA, and it gives consumers new rights by providing them explanation on the automated decision-making systems that are making important decisions that have an impact on them, even if the data is de-identified. But contrary to Bill 25 in Quebec, there are no provisions to oppose the decisions made by the system or no recourse for review of the decisions made by the system. What could be the impact for consumers if C-27 doesn't include anything to oppose the decisions made automatically or does not include any possibility for review? Well, right now, C-27 on demand provide for a possibility to get a review of the automated decisions that were made. We suggest to go even further. It could be difficult for consumers to even know that they were the subject of an automated decision. If I ask for a credit card and I get a refusal, how can I know that the decision was made automatically? I can't. So we do recommend that C-27 provide for an obligation to inform the consumer that the decision was made automatically. And then it allows the consumer to ask for a review of the decision made. But the first step would be to ask for a review by a human being. That's what's provided for in Quebec. You can ask for a human to revise the decision made by an automated tool. And in some cases, it was in the media. Some people were refused some credit, but there were mistakes in that data that was used. So a possibility for review could allow for avoiding these wrong decisions. So you are in favor with integrating sections similar to the Act in Quebec, but I would like to know who could people turn to challenge decisions that were made automatically. So what we suggest is that for people to have the possibility to turn to the company first that use the automatic decision-making to ask for a revision, to ask a person working there to revise the decision. That would be the first step. Thank you. Mr. Massey.
Thanks to our guests for being here and those online. Maybe I'll start with them and then turn to our guests here. We have two models with regards to the privacy commissioner position, either empowering the privacy commissioner and going with that model, or going to a tribunal which will dilute the privacy commissioner's capabilities. So I'm just curious if we almost have to pick one at this point because the tribunal will be new. And maybe I'll start with our online guests. I can't see the names right now, Mr. Chair, so maybe you can pick and then come across the table here to get your opinions as to if you were in our seat. Oh, there we go.
Mr. Gams.
Mr. Gams. Okay, sorry there. Yeah. Oh, there. Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Melu. So we'll start with Mr. Gams and then go from there, I guess. If you had to pick one of those models, which one would it be? Thank you, my friend.
I think I got some help here. Sorry. I think it will empower the privacy commissioner, especially you also need to add expertise on like explainability and also on fairness. So I will basically try to, leverage expertise on privacy, but also increase it with expertise on other ethical issue. And I think being able to conduct an analysis on all this topic is something that seems to be the best idea.
To Mr. Merlieu.
Avec plaisir. Je répondrai en français si vous le permettez.
I'll answer in French if I may. I agree with Professor Gams. It's important that we have the ability to better control the capacity to use personal data in AI. The only thing, or the only process that would be, that in my opinion, that we need to further investigate, it's not the machine learning process itself for artificial intelligence. We have several learning systems, but it's the data that we're going to use. That's where the issue lies. How are we going to assist the commissioner in ensuring that we've used the right data? That's my only concern. Why am I saying this? And I repeat, these systems are black boxes. And it's not easy when we're dealing with a lot of data to understand exactly how it learned this data. We have to be able to control this. That's where we really need to give further thought. I don't have really any solution to propose, unfortunately, but we have to investigate this further. If I understand your question, you're talking about the Data Protection Tribunal. Is that correct?
Commissioner either has a tribunal that's going to decide the penalties and so forth, or empowering the privacy commissioner to be able to have those capabilities. So if we create the tribunal, it creates its own entity of punishment and correction of behavior and so forth, versus that of the hands of the privacy commissioner.
That's one of the difficulties that we talked about in our brief. The bill does have some good things. We give power to order to the ADA, and the fines can go as high as $10 million. That's good, but there are problems and shortcomings, however. AIDA will only have power to make recommendations, and it's the tribunal that's going to decide whether to impose it or not. We feel that the system is too long and unnecessary. Another obstacle with respect to monitoring sanctions is that it doesn't cover all violations of the law. Some violations do not lead to a monetary sanction. We think that any violation of the law should result in a sanction imposed by the tribunal. If the CPPA does recommend that a sanction be issued, there already a lot of steps have gone into this, and I think it's a lot of thought goes into the decision. So why slow down the process? And if you look at what's happening in Quebec, the Access to Information organization can issue sanctions. There's the Office of the Consumers can issue monetary penalties. I don't see why the federal government couldn't do as the Quebec government is doing.
Any particular opinion on that front? That being said, in the fall economic statement, it said that in order to enforce customer-driven banking finance, they need to have some form of government-led entity. Is it the Office of the Privacy Commissioner? If yes, it should have additional resources or manpower to do so, but we're not for or against any specific tribunal versus giving this power to the privacy commissioner.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. Mr. Letarte, nice to have you here today. I've introduced a bill about a month ago in Parliament to make sure consumer-led banking, open banking gets going. Actually, I have a bet. I'm going to have a bet with my colleague from Abitibi-Témiscamingue here, about $50 if we'll get third reading of C27 first or open banking first. I'm not sure. I think I can win some money off of them. But the premise of that is that it seems these are actually in the right stride, parallel to each other. C27 deals with data. For those listening at home, the whole premise around consumer-led banking is really to make mandatory the banks have to share your personal data with other entities who can bank you, which allows, in the UK, when we saw it, 4,000 companies, UK residents are saving £12 billion a year, businesses £8 billion a year. So really great. My first question to you as we look at the key to unlocking consumer-led banking, can consumer-led banking, open banking exist without this legislation right now?
I will say from the get-go, yes, but I think C27 is a really good first step into that regulations. Like, it really laid the foundation upon which we can build, and it levels the playing field about modernization and privacy in this country that is greatly overdue. For my own interest, I hope that we're going to get open banking sooner than later. I really believe this is kind of an emergency to have open banking at this point in time for several reasons. First, we know the cost of living in Canada is problematic. We know that we need to have, more resources to Canadian. We also know that we are losing competitiveness on the international ground. So whatever gets the fastest, but C27 is a good foundation upon which we can build.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on how this industry can thrive with this legislation. So you had 3 amendments, and I want to focus on those. And I'd like you then to each one just elaborate a little bit more what we exactly need. And if you had wording that you'd like to see in an amendment, you can either submit it to the clerk, which is probably the best way. So then we have that in. But let's start with legitimate interest. You mentioned Section 18.3.4. So just elaborate a little bit more on, and if you want to go through all 3 of them, Section 72 and then Section 29, Paragraph 1, walk through just a little bit more detail why these amendments are needed for open banking.
Of course. I'm going to start with Section 18, legitimate interest. The whole premise, as you know, Mr. Williams, and again, thank you so much for introducing that bill. It really, really resonates, and I think it really drives the point forward. But as you know, the premise of open banking, it's about consent and transparency. If we grant some exception, and I'm not against Section 18 per se, I should think that there should be at least some form of criteria or definition of exception, because if open banking is not about the use of secondary data, but in that cases, we can have some companies saying, yes, I have a legit business of terrorists, and kind of breaking the confidence of consumer, because when you agree to share your data, you might not agree to share your data for secondary use. To that end, I believe that we should have really clear exception and criteria to say, like, what is a legitimate? Because, as I mentioned, if we do not have trust in the system, open banking will not be a success. And it's also something that we can look upon other legislation, because they all have. So in Europe, there's this question of legitimate interest that has clearly explicit what it is. Same in Australia. So there's really language to base upon, but I think it's really a confidence issue, and we should not let businesses decide of which secondary uses is good. On Section 72, it's because with what was announced in fall economic statement, it's important, and you mentioned to it, open banking should be mandated to financial regulation. No one should be escape or abdicate its responsibility under that regime. They need to participate. It's kind of the network effect in business. So we should be really careful with the wording we choose to make sure that there's no competitive framework or that any stakeholder cannot escape its responsibilities. So this is why I come back to the simple notion that it's not if, it's when. So when you enter that framework, that you're an accredited participant, you have to obey by the same rules as everybody else. So that's kind of the notion of it. And as I mentioned, every jurisdiction with successful customer-driven banking has really strong imposition on banks. And finally, the last one was clear interest, I believe, that you want to know.
29,
So, this is interesting also because to the same kind of like Section 18, we're not against per se, but we should really define what is the clear interest of the consumer. So for example, like if I'm a company and I'm offering a promotion that will give a better interest rate to a customer, should I get his consent, like saying, hey, you're going to miss out on that promotion? Is it technically it's in his good interest because it's maybe a lower interest rate, but in the same way, it's a business advantage for me. So we should clarify the exception and the criteria, and also some use cases that we see in the UK that are clearly defined. For example, the most vulnerable Canadian, probably there's, I don't know, you have an older, you take care of a senior person, you are children. You can, maybe this senior person is not able to consent to give his data away, but maybe you work with a nonprofit that will clearly give you indication if this person is being fraud or there's unusual spending habits. So if this person is able to consent at this time because she has mental health, Alzheimer, or anybody else, we should have this kind of exemption that is really clearly defined in the criteria. So again, not against per se, but we should be careful about the kind of exception we granted because the premise of data portability rights, it's about consent.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Gaillard, la parole est à vous.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and to the witnesses as well for appearing before the committee. My questions are for Mr. Letarte. I wanted to focus on Section 9 of the Act, which we know is, it requires that each organization that's subject to the Act develop and maintain a privacy management program that includes policies, practices, and procedures that it puts into place in regards to the obligations of the Act. Does your organization already have a management program in place?
We don't. We are not client-facing, so I think this is important to say. We are basically kind of a data aggregator, so we create, I will say, the pipes in the country from an application like, say, like Questrade or WellSample to the banks. But it's something we believe every company should have. And it's something we see, again, in every organization who had an open banking regime. They should have a clear remedy and a clear section on a website or an app where they say what are the remedies and what are the privacy programs in places to protect a consumer. So if a consumer feels that there was foul play and it needs to be made whole, he can consult these policies in real time. And it's also in a way to only unburden a little bit any tribunal or entity in a way to make sure that the person check with the company first. So for the privacy company, we do have one, but it's not as detailed as it should be, and we certainly encourage to have Section 9 to put in place because we believe that every company participating in that ecosystem should have some form of remedy in place.
So do you believe this section is too onerous for organizations, or you think it's...
I don't. I think it should be, it's appropriate.
Sure, okay. How long do you anticipate it'll take for Canadian firms to get in line with this new regulatory framework and to adapt to it?
It depends. I mean, we're seeing astonishing growth in the UK. Like for year over year, it's 80% growth. So it's a really successful public policy. As you know, open banking is more and more in the news. People talk about it, and because I think people know about it. And also an association that we're members are called FinTech Canada made a campaign. And a lot of Canadians have signed up to the campaign saying that they need and they want open banking. So I think adoption for Canadians will be really quick. And this is one of the other reasons that we need to move forward really rapidly with that because there's clearly a need in populations. So I really believe that for 4 or 5 years, it's going to be super mainstream adoption right now.
Okay. My next question is generally for the witness panel, if anyone wants to take it. We've heard witness testimony on this point before as well, but it's regarding the fact that there is a new tribunal, and the tribunal, instead of the Privacy Commissioner, will directly impose those fines. So I just want to get the impression of witnesses on the panel.
Concernant le nouveau tribunal de la protection des renseignements personnels et des données, je vous dirais.
We have mixed opinions with respect to the role of this tribunal. This is a tribunal that has expertise in privacy, so I can see how that comes into play. The issue that we have with respect to this tribunal is that it's going to have a lot of power to overturn or review CPPA's decisions. I think that we have to avoid overturning decisions that have been come to by the CPPA, but it's not the existence of the tribunal or the protection of personal information that is problematic. It's the fact that the CPA will have power to make recommendations, and I think that this is that they should be given a direct power.
Concentration of the power just with the privacy commissioner will be too much concentration?
C'est le modèle qui a été pris au Québec.
That's the model used in Quebec. We have the Consumer Protection Act, and we do have a law on that. We have given the this office the ability to issue fines, but I don't think it's giving it too much authority, because the whole spirit of this legislation is that it has to give the offending business lots of opportunities to comply. They can discuss with the business to tell them how they can comply. That's really a final step when the CPA steps in, so I don't think we have to worry about that.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Thank you. I would like to ask Option Consommateur a question. We talked about amending 110 to get any civil recourse action. Do you feel that this do you think that this will lead to class actions? I think that's an aspect that's quite unique, and we really haven't heard about this. I'd like to really thank you for this issue. I have lots to say about it. Go ahead. The problem we have with 107 is that it's a threat to the civil court in Quebec. This seems to have gone underneath the radar, but it's really worrisome. The formulation or the way that this section is written, the right to bring a business to a tribunal, leads to some very limiting situations. So let's say decisions be made that a business has failed to meet its obligations. It could be a fine can then be issued. In other words, if it doesn't meet the strict conditions that are set forth in this legislation, I would not be able to bring this business to court. And I cannot ensure that they have a fine, and I can't avail myself of my rights before a civil court. And look at the situation where, let's say, the complaint wasn't accepted, and let's say it doesn't meet with the parameters of 107, so that I don't have the right to go to a tribunal. I can't bring them to any other type of court. So we have civil suits before tribunals, but what about the example of a class actions? Let's say these Googles, the tech giants, it's not because of they're not being brought to court because of a complaint that comes from this body. If we have to really interpret Section 107 in its strict terms, well, what we are saying is that this is going to lead to constitutional debates before the courts that'll take years, and simply to clarify what was in the spirit of the legislatures. And we feel that this section does not exclude provincial, the right to go to provincial court, but I think that would resolve a lot of problems, and it would have much better access to the courts for the citizens. My time is up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Massey.
Multitasking. Yeah, exactly. Shame. There's only one of us here, and I hope this wasn't asked, but I think that my colleagues will actually appreciate it. And go around the table again. Maybe we'll start this time in person. Oh, actually, right last. Political parties, should they be part of this oversight included in the bill, or should they be excluded? And I'd appreciate your And if you don't know, that's okay too. That's fine. Okay, all right. We're not just so we can't. Yeah.
Écoutez, on est une association de consommateurs, donc.
We're a consumer association, so we don't deal with those questions normally. But in Quebec, the law does cover political parties.
Monsieur Games ou Monsieur Melouli, si vous voulez.
Professor Games or Professor Melouli, do you want to give your opinion?
One which has to collect personal data should also be included in law. And I mean, coming from France, where political parties are also subject to the privacy legislation, I don't know why it should be different here. Because it's still sensitive and personal data, so same obligation should be also for a political party, I think.
Your position. Do I have any time? Oh, sorry.
Excusez-moi. Non, juste.
Pardon me. I agree with Professor Gams. I think that the political parties should be covered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Monsieur Viss, la parole est à vous pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Viss, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Ms. Levac. Pardon me. Minister Champagne sent a letter to the committee on October 3rd indicating that the government is looking at an amendment to the preamble of the bill and an amendment to Section 12 with respect to consumer protection to strengthen the protection of personal information of children. In the brief that you submitted to the committee, you have said that the proposed amendments are not adequate to adequately protect the privacy of children. You stated in today's testimony that we must amend the bill to consider the best interests of the child. What other measures should we take to improve this bill in order to protect our children? First of all, the amendment proposed for Section 12 talks about the sensitivity of personal information with respect to the use, collection, and communication. There are other steps pertaining to privacy that has to be considered, particularly with respect to children. The collection, retention, and disposal of information, the best interest of the child is much more comprehensive and enables us to look at various aspects of sensitivity. What is best? How do we respect all of the rights of the children? And what are the child's best interests when it comes to development? Other modifications that would integrate the best interests of the child, well, that would be Section 4A. In the French version. In English, it is clear that the child has a right to have his own ECOS, but in French, it's less clear. The child can go do this more indirectly. Thank you. The other day, I read something about VTech and the games manufactured for children. Is that something that we could do as an amendment to deal with children and internet-based games? Can we do anything? First of all, the amendment that looks at the best interests of the child will force us to think about all stages of this game. When I design the game, when I market it, and any other decisions with respect to the personal information of the child. The other way to protect children in situations where we have intelligent games, we have to have this concept of privacy by design, and this has to start right at the design level. We have to bear in mind the risks to privacy as soon as a new service or a new type of merchandise is being offered. We have to think about this right throughout the process. In your brief, you affirmed that the measures proposed in the bill will enable consumers to ask that their information be withdrawn, but you feel that this proposal is inadequate. You talk about the lack of a right to forget, such as the one that exists in Quebec. What are the shortcomings of Section 55? Two things with respect to Section 55. Thank you for asking your question in French. That was impressive. As far as Section 55 is concerned, the right to withdrawal or suppression, but with an asterisk. If the business has a policy that it can keep this personal information, well, it can keep it. So it leaves a big escape door open for businesses. So we have to really, it's important that in Quebec, we have the Desjardins affair that was a breach of security, and it went really high up the chain. We need to be able to suppress this information or this data. That's the first thing, the right to suppress or withdraw. But it's not a right to forget. Now, in the digital world, there are all kinds of information that can be put out there publicly, put into public service, and it's there forever. Internet never forgets. And even if this information was legally published, it can cause harm to consumers who are not able to ask that the data be withdrawn. So information lasts for decades. Every time you go to Google and you enter your name, all that information is kept. And if a child's done something really stupid, yeah, that's another example. A child who made a mistake in its use, and someone published photos of this child, and that rest in the internet sphere, and it may hurt the person's reputation. They may be open to bullying as a result. And it could lead to identity theft. In Europe, they have a right to forget. We have it in Quebec. So it's the right to turn to Google or any other digital platform and to ask that certain information be withdrawn. Has the Quebec legislation already been used? Do you have an example of when this legislation was used? It's hot off the presses. It just came into effect a couple of months ago. So if there are any examples, please send them to us. I'd be happy to do so. Mr. Viss, when you make an effort to speak French, I'm always happy to give you a little bit more time. Noted. And that was quite notable. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Sabor.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
To Philip, in your opening remarks, you mentioned Australia as an example or a bar, and I would say hopefully that's not a sort of a cap on anything that's done in terms of legislation. Can you elaborate on how Australia has laid out its legislation and what you very much liked about the Australian model, please?
Sure. Absolutely. So Australia went beyond the financial sector and create a full customer data right. So I mentioned a little bit, it includes telecommunication, but also like energy and so on. And basically, it's really a government-led model. It's led by the Treasury, which is kind of our own Treasury, but it's also like mandated into 3 separate entities: the equivalent of the Privacy Commissioner, the equivalent of the Competition and Market Authority whatsoever, and another one which is in charge of the technical evolution of it, so everything about standard. So it's a really government-led model in collaboration with the industry in some specific meetings, stakeholder groups. And I think it's really great because it really gives power and gives really great protection to the consumer.
In the model, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate term, what's your feeling about the guardrails in their model, if I can use that term?
Yeah, I think they're pretty accurate and pretty complete because it's kind of the carrot and the stick model. Like, if you participate in the ecosystem, you can really develop a business in a safe and secure way. But also, like, if you do not, for example, stand up reliable APIs, if you do not conform to privacy legislation, you really first get important fines, but also you can be discredited in real time. So you lose the privilege to participate in the model. So it's really with the consumer in mind, making sure that when he's doing business with a company, he makes sure that this business is okay to go, it has the right validation and the right security and safety measure in place.
And you mentioned the ecosystem. And every time you update laws or rules and regulations and so forth, after they haven't been done so for, say, a 10 or 15 or 20-year period, you want to have the regulations to be principle-based.
Yeah.
I like principle-based, so that they can expand with evolving technology, that they can adapt to technology in both ways. It goes a two-way street. How is on the Australian model, since it's already been implemented, how is the ecosystem developed?
I would say developed pretty well, and it's the same for the UK, like, because there's some form of accreditation that are kind of tier accreditations, where basically if you have a new model, except of doing the full onerous process of joining and having the accreditation, you can go via an agent. So it's really also a safe and secure model. So the evolution is really going well. Of course, technology is evolving fast, but they made sure that, again, what you mentioned, it's principle-based, but they have the right kind of committees or stakeholders or kind of forum where they can exchange and move forward with the technology. So even like we were talking about open banking, but it's more and more going about open finance, like involving insurance and mortgages and like wealth management as well. So it's really evolving in a good way because they create this kind of environment where players who participate know that other accredited players are safe and secure and it's good doing business with them.
Because my understanding, I'm a big proponent of open banking. I always have been. I have worked both on Wall Street.
Thank you.
And worked both on Wall Street and Bay Street. I'm very try to keep up with everything that's happening within financial services, open banking. There are different paths going on around the world: the UK, the European Union, Australia, United States. But we really need the update to these rules in order to take the next step on open banking.
Absolutely.
Okay, because and my view of that has always been is that the data belongs to the consumer.
Absolutely.
We've rented that data out basically to get a service back from the company or entity that we're dealing with now.
Absolutely, that's a nice way to put it.
Okay, Chair, je suis complet.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Sorbara. Je passerai la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Sobera. Mr. Perkins, who should get back to his seat if he wants to ask a question.
Your seat. All right, Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by following up on a couple of questions, one by the chair and one by Mr. Gahir, my new lawyer. Mr. Prude, I start with the interesting question on the blocking the tracking issue. And it sort of struck me as you were saying it and as the chair was asking the question. Is it a mechanism like, we implemented a number of years ago the do not call me list, where the government legislated that if you register somewhere that you don't want telemarketers and all those things calling, that you could register there. I think it was for like a 5-year thing, and then you got to do it. Is that a type of thing that the legislation here could do, or because I'm struggling with how you could do it, because you're still dealing with having somebody, if it's through cookies or through the cookie thing, which is very hard, and as you mentioned, the fatigue, very difficult to say that somebody will actually go through and click, do not track me out of many options.
J'aime bien l'analogie entre le do not call et le...
I like the analogy between do not call and do not track. With do not call, In order to push your analogy a little bit further, I put my name on a list, and all of the business must respect my refusal. I don't have to call all of the telemarketers one after the other to say that I've refused this. Same thing what we're suggesting, but your analogy makes sense. Now, just to understand the context better, when I go on internet, when I go on any mobile application or any platform of a tech firm, there is an omnipresent data collection process going on, especially by the tech giants. They use the data to target their advertising, and the consent of consumers, well, is often not very effective. They're also an internet site that tracks, well, they'll have a little pop-up that asks you whether you give your permission or not. What we're proposing is that there has to be a parameter that's integrated into my telephone or on my computer that forces the companies to respect my refusal to be tracked and give my data. There are already existing mechanisms that make this possible. In part, some mechanisms you can actually ask to refuse targeted advertising. If I'm a consumer and I really want to stop being this, I want to stop having my data tracked or captured, the only thing is to block all of the cookies and download apps that allow me to block this type of solicitation. So what we're suggesting, and we've been doing this for several years now, give a block and consent that would be accessible to all consumers.
The next question I have, I'll come back to. It's what I was seeking my legal advice from Mr. Gahir on the issues around the tribunal. So if I still have time, I'll come back to it. But because I wanted to ask, I think it was Monsieur Letard, I think you mentioned the issues around 29.1. Yeah. So when I look at 29.1, and thank you for bringing up, it's under a heading of public interest, but it is pretty broad. So, and nowhere in the bill can I find a definition of what public interest is. And so if I read it, it means that if you can't get consent in a timely way, you can still do whatever you need to do if it's in a public interest, is the way I'm reading it. I wonder if you could expand a little more on your thought on 29.1.
Yeah, of course. Again, find it a little bit too broad. And as an operator of a business, I think we should want some clarity and criteria on what is the public interest, because we don't want to have a backlash of that and, trying to create our own product where it doesn't fit the public interest. So I will welcome criteria and exception on clear public interest. And again, the example I gave to Mr. Williams earlier, if, for example, I can benefit from a new program that will save me money ultimately, but I have to commit by this deadline. Is it in my clear interest? Probably, because I'm going to save money. But is it also a commercial interest? Yes. But this is a kind of clarification that we want to have, because, as I mentioned, the premise of open banking, it's about trust and being empowered with your data. So you always know where they are and you always know where they consent. So if suddenly someone is being on board on some program that he did not consent to, or is being sent direct marketing stuff that he did not consent to, this is not what the premise of open banking is, and this is therefore how you lose trust. So this is why we wanted clarification of what the public interest is, but also exception in cases of how we can navigate through that. So thank you for your question.
As a marketer, I'm always looking for those holes I can drive a truck through to use data in any way I need to for the company I work for. So if I have time, Mr. Chair, just Mr. Plourde, my last question based on my discussion. I think we're all struggling here with the testimony that we've had about the tribunal. Some people think it's a good thing. Some legal guys think it's a bad thing for different reasons. Too much power sometimes in a single person as a privacy commissioner, and not all privacy commissioners are created equal. And then others saying that it will slow the process down, and others saying it actually will speed it up because you don't have to go through the intricacies of the court straight directly from the privacy commissioner. And then if you want to go to court after you don't like the tribunal, that's a more difficult thing, but it may actually speed it up or slow it down. The competition tribunal, for example, isn't quite worked out as fast as people think it would be. So I just wonder, you've made some comments, but I think we need a little more guidance on that one.
Je comprends bien, vous voulez comprendre l'interaction du
You want to understand consumer rights and the tribunal. As I said earlier, we have mixed feelings about the tribunal. We would like the CPA to be able to do this. It's not the biggest issue for us, whether it's the protection of data or the tribunal. What concerns us, it's not the tribunal, it's all of the other tribunals that concern us. As a consumer, I can use this new federal law to take them to court, but there are some very significant restrictions in this bill that might hurt the consumer when they want to go before the courts. It's not about the tribunal per se. It's about setting aside the process. There's a whole civil process which is being hindered or may risk being hindered by this new bill, C-27, in Quebec. I'll use Quebec as an example because that's the territory I'm familiar with. We have our own privacy protection that has more teeth than what we have on the table here. Quebec also provides for civil recourse or civil remedy. So if I feel that a business has not complied with the federal law, I can turn to the civil court in Quebec and avail myself of my rights. But in our opinion, there's a risk in the current bill that with respect to the scope of the bill, and it's going to lead to debate. So we would invite the MPs to ensure that this bill does not hinder the civil recourse. We're very concerned about this, and we have to ensure that the process is done properly. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Maintenant, la parole à Monsieur Van Bynen pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Van Bynen, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In previous testimony and some again today, there are two different approaches in managing and making safe the use of artificial intelligence. And the approach that we're looking at currently is that we're looking at how do we regulate artificial intelligence in various capacities. And those capacities are the privacy, competitiveness, and the use of technology. And we've heard in the past that, and I think the reference in the previous meeting was a distributed model for regulation. In other words, have the privacy commissioner take a look at the use of artificial intelligence in that capacity, and similarly, the commissioner for competition and for technology. So my question is to Mr. Gams. What's your thought on those two different approaches, and which would you prefer, or which would you recommend as being more effective?
I think having the expertise in the privacy commissioner on privacy and other issue to artificial intelligence, I think is a good way to already leverage expertise that is there. So I think a centralized entity being able to audit company for privacy, but also fairness and explainability, I think would be the more efficient way to go forward rather than splitting this in different entities that would anyway have to coordinate because this issue are intricate. So if you are a machine learning engineer and you have to implement privacy, fairness, and explainability in your AI model, there is tension and synergy between this issue, and you cannot do them separately. So I think the auditing part should also be one entity with the expertise to do that.
Great, thank you. My next question is to Mr. Mullally. And you keep making a reference to the black box First of all, I think you mentioned it's critically important that we authenticate the data and ensure that the data is accurate. So the one part of the question is how do we go about making sure, or should we regulate a methodology for authenticating data? And then secondly is with respect to the black box that all of this goes into, with artificial intelligence and the Data Act, the obligation is imposed on those responsible for the intelligence system to contribute to. Now, is there a way, or does this bill provide sufficient algorithmic transparency, and is there enough authority in that, as you've seen from the bill? So I'm concerned about the authenticity of the data, and should that be, is there a way to regulate that? And then secondly, the transparency, and does the bill go far enough to satisfy the needs for the transparency of the algorithm?
Est-ce qu'on peut m'entendre? Vous devez laisser un...
Je peux...
I'm sorry. I was listening to the translation at the same time. I think that the bill, as it is drafted today, does not go far enough in order to deal with the black box, because it really is a black box. So when you wonder whether we should regulate the use of data, I think the answer is yes. But when you also mentioned this, I think that the Privacy Commissioner can play a big role in making people aware of this issue, because you can play with data. You know, we can play with it any way we want. We can massage it. I can take any application, you click on something, you ask that the data be forwarded, and as a consumer, you have no idea whether it was done properly or not. So the data, when you consider all of the hundreds of millions of data that businesses have, it's a very complicated process. It's very complex. So with this bill, are we sure that we're going to be able to control everything? I'm not sure of that. Are we able to define the mechanisms for training and the choice of the data, the way the data is used, the AI systems? I think the answer there is yes. And it can go beyond the data itself. It can even apply to the teams that make the data choices. That has a significant impact. The discrimination is quite possible. We've seen this earlier. There are a lot of people who are left out from this choice of data. And this was negative for a certain section of the population. So today, I think that the bill, in my opinion, can go even further to set the parameters regarding the use of data for better accountability from businesses, and also give more authority to the Privacy Commissioner to provide training as to the use of this data.
One quick question is, do you feel that there's enough value in the penalties? I've read that there are monetary penalties, and is there any provision that should be considered in terms of requiring the offending party to disgorge the data that was created and or to stop processing? And do you feel that that would be a critical authority for the privacy commissioner or the tribunal to have? And the purpose of this is that if it's only a monetary penalty, then it simply becomes a cost of doing business. And so how can we have a more meaningful regime as far as penalties?
The sanctions, the fear here, yes, you can always increase the fines, but the fear is, as I said at the start, these aren't certain systems. It's a system of non-perfection. And we have to bear that in mind, because a business may comply with all of the process, but the results might be unexpected. Or when a business uses AI data, when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of pieces of data, you don't have the certitude that everything is clean, that all the data is clean, that everything is in compliance. The issue here, well, if we put more tougher restrictions on this, we may put a brake on economic development, because it's an ecosystem that is developing so quickly. It's an ecosystem where businesses have to be competitive in order and use this data, and it will be too restrictive in controlling data, in my opinion. That may delay the development of systems, because developing such systems takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And as we say, you have to think about a trade-off between controlling and realizing that the control may not be exhaustive. It may be a spot control that's done. It's important to realize this because data is AI. So the more constraints or controls that we put on with respect to business accountability, you have to think about world competition. Thank you very much, Melululi. I think you've put your finger on the issue that concerns us, that is striking a balance between these two interests that are not always harmonious. Mr. Lemire, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Letarte, I heard that the bill is not clear with respect to negative effects and the exception of consent for the collect and use communication of data. Can you explain how the bill should clarify what is meant by negative impacts and what is the impact of this ambiguity with respect to personal information? That's always the question. Negative, why? Was privacy compromised? Was it beneficial to the company but not to the consumer? That's always a dilemma. Is the data sharing, is it pertain to consumer habits? Is a person on now a diet? Has a person changed jobs, bought a house? If a company wants to get their hand on this data and start up a profile, we can see that this consumer has changed his spending habits. So that might be an advantage for the business, but I don't know. So you have to really define. You have to decide whether the impact is negative, positive. I think you have to put the consumer at the heart of everything, because otherwise the data collection can be very intrusive. And the negative impact is that, well, let's say that a person, we could conclude that the person's mental health is at stake. You like to look at best practices. Are there best practices from other jurisdictions that we could use to deal with negative impacts in Europe? There's a GDPR, which is extremely precise and provides for certain exceptions. When can direct marketing be prevented? Is an announcement targeting? Should it be considered positive? Yes or no? Australia does the opposite. They allow direct marketing, but with certain exceptions. So yes, so there are some best practices out there. We're lagging behind the other countries, and I think we have to decide what is best for Canada. Thank you, Mr. Massey.
I'd like to continue that with your opinions on the United States.
Yes.
And their process right now, and then if we are in a different approach, how will that maybe potentially affect investment trade? Because we have many companies that are,
of course,
matching up. Thank you.
The good news is that the CFPB released its first set of rules like a couple of weeks ago, and it's closely looking at what Canada wants to do. Of course, the CFPB isn't clear about everything, and it's more like a laissez-faire approach on some stuff. But for the first time, it clearly outlines that they want to create a universal data portability right, and that it's going to be imposed on financial institutions. So once it's done and we have the same approach, and I know people at Finance Canada are talking to CFP people from the CFPB as well, I don't think it's going to be that difficult to make trade across the border because the big team and the principal base are quite similar to that effect.
Right, and with that, is the kind of a more discretion for the consumer than to choose, almost like the level of exposure that they want?
Absolutely, and also the time of exposure. Like for example, if you want to try two different companies who offer the same product, you like one or you prefer more one, you can drop the other one immediately, and then therefore your data is not used by this company anymore. So it's really about the power of the consumer, but also the time that you can revoke your consent.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Massé. Ça conclut.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. This concludes this meeting, this 100th meeting of Industry and Science Technology for the House of Commons. I'd like to thank this panel, and I would like to point out that this is more the exception than the rule to have so much French spoken during a committee meeting in Canada. So I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Menouli and Mr. Gam, who joined us online, especially Mr. Menouli, who is at Laval University, right in my writing, so hello. And on this, I'd like to thank the interpreters, the analysts, the clerk. We'll suspend briefly before we come back for an in-camera meeting to deal with committee business. So the meeting is suspending.
Ah ben là, on a... Merci de rajouter.
Thank you.